12. November 1946. Hanover, British Zone. A man named Carl takes out a municipal notebook and writes a line he cannot say aloud at the office desk where he sits. "We are lucky the Allies need us more than they need justice." He is 38. He has a ration card and a scar on his left forearm from a factory accident in 1931. He fills in housing forms by day and moves rubble by the barrow on weekends, part of a rotation the city has organized. He is married to Lotte, who stands in ration queues and returns with less than she hoped. He has a son, Ernst, born in 1938, who knows more about sirens than arithmetic. He has a cousin, Willie, who does not return from the East. At night, he watches the British searchlight on the dome of the ruined museum and counts his luck with a pencil, because partial miracles are easiest to measure. The line he writes is not bravado, it is mathematics. The mathematics of food, rooms, transport permits, and the new vocabulary of denazification. The arithmetic of guilt. He will become a minor functionary of a city that must be rebuilt from timber, bricks, and silence. The morning after surrender, 9 May 1945, Hanover. The sky is the same color as the now empty station clock. The British patrol move down Jorgstrasse, ankles dusty, rifles at parade slant. The water still does not run in half the streets. Bombing had turned neighborhoods into geological layers of brick and plaster. The noise of traffic is replaced with the scrapes and grunts of handcarts. The word Trümmerfrauen becomes common in the newspapers and in the mouths of men who watch women swing hammers at masonry. Not a new occupation, but a new necessity. Occupation reports note the specifics. A British Civil Affairs memo of 12 May catalogues 32,000 homeless, 132,000 dwelling units destroyed or badly damaged, rail lines reduced to a spiderweb of twisted steel. In the American zone, Stuttgart and Munich report similar numbers with different names. Bundesarchiv records contain lists that weight the loss in hard terms: cubic meters of rubble cleared per day, calories allocated per head, tons of coal delivered by rail. Human loss is counted in missing persons, notices posted on boards near the ration office, a curated chorus of faces and dates. Karl Heinz, born 1923, last seen near Königsberg. Margret, age 12, seeking mother. The posters are the city's anthology of incompletion. The occupation requires order. The order requires curfew. Curfew is printed on posters and enforced in checkpoints. Verboten returns to walls in a new typography. Fear of retribution is a material in this new architecture. The mathematics of this fear is practical. Be inside by 9. Carry your papers. Be deferential. Carl has learned these habits under other uniforms. The colors change. The mathematics remains. He is searched near Egidi Entorplatz and holds his hands still. He answers in clipped German to a constable from Manchester who learned 3 commanding phrases in a week. Hunger is immediate. The winter of 1946 and 47 will get its own proper noun, the Hunger Winter. But even in 1945, the arithmetic of calories is a daily problem, a new sort of ledger. Ration cards allocate fat, meat, bread, sugar, jam, soap. Allied intelligence summaries note that a German adult receives about 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day on paper, less in practice. The black market adjusts this deficit with lucid precision. 2 cigarettes for a pound of potatoes, 4 cigarettes for a loaf of bread. An American chocolate bar equals a day of goodwill. Cigarettes, more stable than the Reichsmark, become a currency with predictable exchange rates. Carl keeps a paper slip in his wallet where he writes the conversion rates. Deck 45, 3 cigs, 1 lb meat. The numbers are approximate. Trust is a luxury, Accuracy a risk. British military government notes caution their men about fraternization. Caution erodes by March 1946. The rubble is not just demolition, it is an excavation of possibility. Women slap mortar with bare hands and blow dust off photographs found in stairwells. Children magnetize nails with their breath and sell them. A city economy arises that values straight beans more than honest answers. Carl returns from his office and joins a brigade of neighbors who pass bricks hand to hand, as if this chain were the city's new bloodstream. He whispers the names of streets that no longer exist to keep their map alive in his head. He is not alone in this private cartography. Oral histories recorded in the 1970s, women and men sitting at kitchen tables with tape recorders between them, are full of a particular grammar: where the bakery was, where the church had been. Memory becomes geographic correction. The first purge comes in questionnaires. Fragebogen, 6 pages, 131 questions. Were you a member? Did you donate? Did you attend? Did you speak? What was your rank? Name your colleagues. List the organizations. Swear. Carl takes the form home on 20 January 1946 and places it next to the bread on the kitchen table. He stares at it for a long time and then begins. He writes that he joined the Labour Front because one had to. He writes that he never denounced anyone. He writes that his job as an office clerk in 1937–1945 was not a political act. He writes in the passive voice because it softens a world that rewarded the active. Denazification is a system. Systems produce categories. The categories are printed on the backs of the forms and repeated in Spruchkammer decisions. Major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. The French zone labels them differently. The categories intersect like overlapping fingerprints. A man in Hamburg has a different file number than a similar man in Munich, but the arithmetic tends toward consistency. In the records, half of the men are categorized as Mitläufer followers. The majority of these are fined, told to pay into a fund for victims. Offices cannot function without clerks. Factories cannot run without foremen. The system tracks guilt with a sliding ruler that often measures utility. Carl is summoned to a Spruchkammer hearing on 6 March 1947. A commission of neighbors, men partially vetted and partially anxious, sit with pencils and ask him to confirm his answers. A British legal advisor watches without speaking. Carl says, "I was a follower." He does not say, "I voted yes because it was simpler." He does not say, "I despised the party, but took the promotion." He does not say, "When the Jewish family in the next block disappeared, I moved silently past their door because I understood that silence was the price of survival." He says, "I was a follower." The files record this in the shorthand of bureaucratic adjudication, Mitläufer. He is fined 50 marks, paid in installment. He is allowed to keep his job because the city's housing office must log the arrival of thousands. The mathematics of guilt is managed in columns. One column tallies names of those jailed. Another lists those who quietly return to desks with new titles, specialist instead of party functionary. There is less algebra of remorse in these ledgers than the city's citizens will pretend later. Allied intelligence summaries are explicit by mid-1947. Denazification must be balanced with stability. The Cold War writes its own equation into the margins. A memorandum from the American military government in Stuttgart states plainly, "Economic recovery and administrative continuity necessitate limited reintegration." Justice is trimmed to fit the available chairbacks. On the streets, the blue coats of British constables mingle with German policemen who have kept their boots but lose their swagger. Curfew slips. Fraternization rules are relaxed. A black market thrives under bridge arches where afternoon light makes things look official. Carl will buy bread with cigarettes on 118 February 1946. He will hand the cigarettes with a practiced distance to a young man with an Italian accent who lives at a displaced persons camp on the edge of Hainholz. He knows the camp as a rumour made concrete, 2 wooden barracks, a chain-link fence, a posted guard, and a multilingual chorus of languages that had for 12 years been mostly absent from this city. Jews from Poland and Hungary, forced labourers from Ukraine, French POWs who linger because home feels implausible. A bulletin from the British zone in September 1945 calls them DPs. The abbreviation becomes another word to be avoided while standing in line. Contact is accidental and unavoidable. A group of men in striped jackets moved in trucks through Hanover in May 1945, the last week of the war, hungry and staring. One man, with no cap, looks directly at Carl where he stands with his son behind a telegraph pole. The gaze is entered into Carl's private archives and filed under Not Useful, then moved to Never Go Away. A British documentary crew arrives in June to film Bergen-Belsen, 90 kilometers north, and the footage is shown in cinemas, with the lights on and the audience made to watch. An occupation report notes, the audience was quiet. The line between knowing and not knowing becomes mutable. Wir haben es nicht gewusst is a phrase heard in bakeries and streetcars and in Sprechkammer hearings. We did not know. There are gradations of truth and gradations of denial. Knowledge is, like coal, in short supply and unevenly distributed. DP camps become part of the landscape, then part of the rearview mirror. Feldafing and Landsberg in the American zone become cities within cities, with their own committees, schools, theatre groups. Allied reports describe self-governance, admired and resented. In Hanover, DP camps hold communities that insist on Sabbath, on weddings, on the use of words that the Germans nearby have scrubbed from their own speech. Barbara from a nearby neighbourhood writes in a letter preserved in the Lower Saxony archives, "They sing at night, and I cannot sleep, and I am glad they sing." She then asks in the same letter whether butter is available in the American canteen. The equality of human suffering is a thing stated and untrue. The arithmetic of suffering does not balance. For those who survived the camps, the arithmetic is an abyss. For those who survived the raids, the arithmetic is area, bombed blocks counted by hectares. Displacement is a common language spoken without comprehension. Carl understands expulsion when it occurs to him, as rumour first, then as lived fact. His parents' farm stood near Oppol, now called Opol in Upper Silesia. It had been in the family for 3 generations. His father's knuckles were the colour of the earth and cracked in the winter cold. In January 1945, as the Red Army approached, his parents and uncle loaded a wagon with blankets and a sewing machine and joined a column edging west. It was a column with mathematics of its own, wagons per kilometre, children per wagon, kilometres before the column broke. On 24 January, the column stalled near Breslau, and his mother wrote in a notebook the names of her sons in block letters. They made it to a village near Halle. Then, in the summer of 1945, Polish administrative authorities took possession of the farm. Land reform under a new regime was fast and blunt. A Polish farmer whom Carl would never meet took over the fields, a man said to be from around Kol, resettled by a government whose maps had been redrawn in a conference room far away. Family rumour called him Piotr. Records do not confirm this. The rumour was enough. Carl did mathematics with this rumour. The arithmetic of displacement becomes part of post-war life in West German towns. 7 million expellees from the East arrive between 1945 and 1947, carrying what they can and a certainty that they have been subtracted from. 12 million would be the total over a longer arc. Towns already in ruins must absorb new populations. In Hanover, in January 1946, the city has 35,000 inhabitants, down from 471,000 before the war. The math is not simply addition, it is division. The arithmetic of scarce rooms, jobs, and food produces new resentments. Locals call them Polacken behind their backs, ignoring that they are German. Families are placed into shared apartments, Wohnraumbewirtschaftung, the management of rooms. Karl signs the notices that place strangers in hallways and kitchens. He watches as neighbors develop a new skill, making space out of grievance. He reads job applications where hometowns are scribbled out and replaced by temporary addresses. The file system must expand to handle this. Card indexes multiply. Housing, employment, rationing, denazification, repatriation, missing persons, disease control. Allied administrators like a good card index. German clerks like a precise alphabetization system. The two bureaucracies graft themselves together and become, in the public imagination and in unofficial jokes, a new creature with too many arms. Karl is promoted to oversee a subsection, 10 women at desks assembling housing permits. His signature becomes a resource. A literate man whose hands are smooth again can live off his signature in the way a man once lived off soil. He writes in his notebook at home, "We are building a city of paper." He crosses out paper and writes permission. He crosses out permission and writes forgetting. On a walk to work in October 1946, he sees a poster pasted over a cracked enamel sign. The poster is part of an American-run campaign encouraging citizens to participate in local elections. "Demokratie lebt," the bold text declares. Democracy is alive. He votes in October and again in November. He votes for the party that promises order and jobs and a social market economy. He hears the name Ludwig Erhard, a face framed by a cigar that will become familiar. He hears the name Marshall. He sees sacks with USA stenciled on the sides, flour unloaded by men who swear in English about the angle of the ramp. He stands with his son at the station in July 1948 when coal arrives in quantities that make people stand straighter. Marshall Plan shipments are an arithmetic of tons and hope. The numbers are tracked in Allied summaries. Dollars allocated. Tranches released. Frankfurters joke about Marshall Hilf in a way that betrays gratitude pinned inside self-respect. The language of charity is never clean. The Americans insist on structural reform in exchange. German industry is dismantled in some sectors. IG Farben is split, cartels broken. But the need for production overrules earlier punitive ideas. In a British memo in April 1947, a small but telling sentence, "We must have German coal." The Ruhr is physics, not politics. The altered equation of Europe demands German output. Meanwhile, denazification recedes into the background noise of work. Spruchkammer offices are downsized. Cases are closed. A man who sat on a denazification panel applies for a job in the police. He gets it because he knows the files. A teacher who signed an oath returns to the classroom with a revised syllabus. Schoolbooks are printed in muted colors. The chapters on 1933-45 are short, carefully hedged, and framed as a period of misguidance and catastrophe. The math problem at the end of the chapter asks the student to calculate the percentage of housing destroyed in his city. No questions ask what was destroyed beyond roofs and beams. The official remembrance tends to emphasize German suffering from bombings and expulsions. The pages on victims, the ones who do not return, are thin. Karl runs his fingers over the paper and does not know what to tell his son. He knows what he does not want to tell him. A cold front with political teeth moves from east to west. Churchill calls it a curtain in a speech in Missouri in March 1946. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, Karl reads the phrase in a newspaper a week late. The words feel already familiar. The border is not a line to him, it is a subtraction. His parents' land now contains other people. A Polish farmer is behind that curtain, pausing with sweat in his eyes, slapping the flank of a draft animal in a field that was once mapped by Karl's father. The new man is also trapped between two empires, one that left and one that arrived. Soviet policies restructure the village in a new vocabulary: nationalized industry, political education, surveillance. A cousin who stayed in Silesia writes once, in a tone that is grey and careful, "They have made new names for the roads." There is a meeting every week. The church is full and careful. West Germany is not born until 1949, but the gestation is swift and complicated. The B-zone, American and British zones integrated in 1947 becomes the administrative backbone of the future state. Currency reform in June 1948 exchanges old money for new, Reichsmarks for Deutschemarks. On 20 June 1948, Karl receives 40 marks. He stands in a line that curls around the Rathaus and listens to men say that prices will be set honestly now. The black market takes a breath and then flares. For a few days, people spend what they have. Shop windows fill with goods, some hoarded, some newly produced. A shoe store displays more shoes than the town has seen since 1939. A child cries in front of a toy train set. The arithmetic of want is simply restated in new numbers. The Berlin blockade begins in June 1948. The airlift remakes logistics into a moral theatre. In Hanover, the railway station announces flights and waits as if they were schedule times. The city watches planes pass overhead and thinks of bread in new mathematical units, payload per day. It is in those months that Karl develops an affection for American punctuality. He finds it clean. Then he remembers other systems that had liked timetables and feels ashamed of his own attraction to order. By 1949, Bonn becomes the seat of a new state. The basic law is a modest constitution with an unsentimental view of human potential and limits. It is written with the memory of emergency orders and the mathematics of state failure in the margins. The lines about human dignity are printed in a font that becomes familiar in courtrooms. The borders are still provisional. The East is not merely a map, but a silence pressed into the mouths of people who have left. Karl receives a letter from his parents in September 1949 through a circuit of addresses. The letter says little. It infers much. It contains the word harvest. It contains the word inspection. It contains the word comrade with quotation marks around it. It says, "We are well," and he understands what it means to be well when one is not allowed to be specific. As the 1950s begin, Karl leaves the housing office and takes a job at a factory that makes pumps and valves. Rebuilding runs on steel and seals. He counts inventory and slides pieces of paper across a desk to a man who runs lathes and mills. The work is steady. The plant is clean and precise. The images of the 1930s that had promised order and plenty are replaced by the pragmatic same without banners. The Wirtschaftswunder is not a miracle in the religious sense. It is an arithmetic executed with machines, American investment, European integration, and a workforce disciplined by shortage. It is also built on unspoken bargains. Former members of the old elite return to boardrooms. The men who ran synthesis plants and engineered rail schedules mutate into plausible modern gentlemen, with new ties and a preference for Anglo-American codes of conduct. Karl notices, at a meeting of Furtner and supervisors, How easily the older men in leadership laugh now with authority figures who do not wear uniforms. He notices how quickly the words past and mistake and God be thanked are used in the same sentences. He hears about new European coal and steel arrangements. He watches a television set in a pub. 8 men crowded around a screen the size of a bread box as the Chancellor speaks in a dignified monotone about integration and prosperity. He hears a new word, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the mastering of the past, and thinks it sounds like trying to design a pump that will move mud by willing it to be water. Home life reorganizes itself around these new realities. Young Ernst grows. He does well in mathematics. His textbooks present history as the steady attainment of rational institutions. His teacher avoids sentences that begin with we. Karl sits with him at the kitchen table and watches his son trace a map of Germany, divided by a fence that looks like a comb needle. He considers telling his son about the missing neighbor boys, about the days when certain jokes were dangerous because they were serious, and certain silences were the price of a permit. He does not speak. His silence is a habit and a refuge and a debt. Everyone in post-war Germany pays in a currency that is not the Deutsche Mark. It is the currency of what one did not say. The mathematics of this silence is social, not fiscal. Say less to the neighbor. Ask less from the teacher. Remember more than one can carry, but less than is honorable. Karl attends public commemorations where wreaths are laid in front of plaques listing the names of local dead, bombing victims, soldiers, expelled families represented by a bronze figure with a suitcase. The ceremonies are humane but incomplete. The victims from the camps are not present in the same way. Yet, the camps are never entirely out of sight. The television broadcasts a documentary in 1960 that shows bulldozers pushing bodies that have become symbols too heavy for the screen. A voice says, Auschwitz, in a tone that makes it a stone in the room. Throughout the 1950s, the man behind the curtain, the Polish farmer, remains in Karl's thought like a minor but insistent chord. He imagines the man's hands in winter, cracking in the same places his father's cracked. He imagines the bad harvest and the party meeting. He imagines a child in a school where maps are printed with new borders. He imagines that this man also counts things at night, sacks of seed, kilograms of bread, the number of men in the village who drank too much after the Red Army billeted the officers. He imagines that this man also learned to speak in half sentences. Their symmetry comforts him and betrays him. It makes him complicit in an imaginary equality that erases an inconvenient set of facts. He recognizes the problem and writes about it in his notebook, a private footnote to his own life. We were not the only ones to be trapped, but our trap was made by us. Legal reckoning continues in the Federal Republic in bursts. The Einsatzgruppen trial in 1958, the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials from 1963 to 1965. Newspaper columns spill with new names and old crimes. The courts calculate guilt with a vocabulary of personal intent and organizational responsibility that fits poorly the scale of murder. The mathematics of guilt shifts again. The language of orders followed is tested in courtrooms where photographs are entered into evidence and the faces of defendants are seen clean and old under fluorescence. Karl reads accounts after dinner. He looks at a picture in a newspaper of a defendant seated between lawyers and thinks of the day he wrote, "We are lucky." He recognizes his own luck in the time it has taken to take this picture. On 25 June 1963, he writes again in his notebook. He writes, "We built our peace on bargains we did not discuss." He adds, "My son thinks freedom is a straight line. It is a curve negotiated in a fog." He does not show the notebook to anyone. He does not feel absolved by writing. He recognizes that confession is not penance, and that the ledger is in a currency no one has minted. The literary life of post-war Germany blooms. The Grupo 47 debates aesthetics and responsibility. Heinrich Boll writes about rubble and the minutiae of survival, with a comedy that does not relieve. Günter Grass writes about tin drums and people beating rhythms to drown out what others order. In 1961, the wall is built, and a set of metaphors become concrete. The border is no longer barbed wire and forest, but concrete and guard towers and an arithmetic of escape attempts. The man behind the curtain now lives behind the wall, and if he tries to leave, someone will add his attempt to a file with the sort of signature Karl had learned to avoid. Work hums. Hanover's streets are smooth. The rubble becomes photographs in albums, and the women in those photos are awarded medals and paragraphs in textbooks. The Hoover Dam sort of feeling about economic growth becomes both an ethos and a narcotic. Wohlstand für alle, prosperity for all, is a slogan and a promise almost fulfilled. The arithmetic of plenty contains its own deceptions. Life is measured in washing machines purchased and vacations taken to the Adriatic. The East recedes like a shoreline from a window on a ship. The old farm is now 2 decades away. His parents die in Halle in 1962, and the funeral is organized with difficulty. He stands at a graveside in a cemetery where headstones carry dates from the 19th century, and the language of the 20th reminds him that no soil is innocent. He returns across the border with a bag of apples and a sense that farewell is a permanent state. He knows men who once wore uniforms now run departments. He drinks with one of them at a retirement party and listens to a story that is polished by repetition. "We were all fools," the man says. "We suffer too." The sentence is true and insufficient. He disagrees and nods at the same time. He tells no one about the lists he kept in 1945 and 1946. He keeps the notebook hidden inside a folder labeled tax receipts. The city continues to organize its memory. Memorials appear. A plaque is affixed to a wall near a square where deportations once staged. Wreaths are laid there more often. Names are researched. A school project in 1967 collects oral histories from elders about a Jewish doctor who treated children in 1932. The old women cry and then say, "Wir haben das nicht gewusst," and then talk for an hour about the day his door was sealed with paper strips. Truth arrives in a ledger that is peculiar. Entries of lies, then entries of perspectives, then entries of facts, none of them balancing. The mathematics of truth is a proof that no one man can complete. And yet, there are absolutes. The victims do not come back. The money paid as compensation settles into accounts with numbers that can be audited. The dead do not write to thank the payers for their administrative competence. The complicity of institutions is documented in files with stamps. The individual senses of right and wrong fold under the weight of these facts until they are creased like letters. Karl reads about a compensation hearing where a survivor argues for a sum that the official says the law does not permit. He imagines being that official and concludes that the law is a machine built with an error built into its gears. In his factory office, he watches a young worker from Portugal, recruited as a Gastarbeiter, learning German with noun-gender mistakes that are adorable until they are not. He remembers the men in DP camps and notes the difference. These men have contracts and leave trains and pay their insurance contributions and go to pubs. He recognizes another layer of the arithmetic of Europe. Labor moves to places where work exists. Categories shift from displaced to guest to colonial memory relocated. He watches one of these men marry a woman whose father is a former sergeant. He notes the laughter at the wedding and thinks of a machine humming, not because it is perfect, but because it is well oiled, because someone pays attention. In 1968, students march in cities across the Federal Republic. They carry signs accusing their parents' generation of hypocrisy, collaboration, and silence. The mathematics of the accusation is not wrong. Its tone is wrong enough to stall empathy. Carl watches footage of a young woman, hair in a careless bun, speaking about institutions with rice paper certainty. He is impressed and hurt. He goes to his notebook. He writes, on 14 May 1968, "They are not wrong, but they do not know what a queue feels like when bread is miscounted." He writes, "We thought we were surviving, not choosing." He writes, "I know this is just another excuse in a world that manufactures them with reliability." He meets a man in August of that year at a trade fair from Opole in a delegation from the Polish People's Republic. The man's German is slow and precise. They do not speak of farms. They do not speak of 1945. They do not speak of the curtain. Although the fair exhibits a curtain of colorful synthetic textiles that both men know are proof of European industry's vigor. They speak of pumps and valves. They exchange cards and a handshake that is careful. Both know that someone is watching details in each report they will file. The border is a dossier. They are careful men. They have learned the mathematics of caution. It is the 1970s. Time has made history both less urgent and more inescapable. Willy Brandt kneels in Warsaw in 1970 before a monument to the uprising and creates an image that will be argued about, praised, framed, railed against. The kneeling is math too. One man bends, and something in the ledger moves on a different level, something that cannot be measured precisely but is felt like a change in pressure in the ear when the train enters a tunnel. Carl retires in 1973. He cleans his desk and places his notebooks into a box. He walks across the city on a Tuesday and counts the places where his mind had counted before. The pole where he hid in 1945. The shop where one could buy a loaf with a packet of Lucky Strikes. The corner where a DP camp truck turned. The square where a demonstration did not turn violent because the police captain made a decision. The school where his son's teacher decided to use a book with a darker chapter on 1938. He thinks of his parents' grave in Halle, and of the man who farmed their land in Opole, who may be retired too now, who may tell his grandchildren a story that will never be born into a language that Carl can understand. He is aware that this imagined symmetry is comforting and wrong again. There is more to the story than his city. The Federal Republic expands its economy, tightens its law, modifies its memory. Trials continue in smaller courts in towns that had never desired to be nouns in sentences containing large crimes. A pastor writes a book about guilt that is subtitled in a way that prepositions can bear: guilt before God, guilt before men. The church has its own arithmetic of confession. The law holds hearings. Families maintain the habit of not speaking at dinner tables. The war after the war continues, less as a pitched battle than as a slow rearrangement of sentences and posture. Carl's son becomes an engineer. He votes, he argues. He owns a television that can receive more channels than Carl thought necessary in any civilization. His children watch American films with German dubbing and wonder why their grandfather insists on reading the credits to the end. He holds them and does not speak about 1945 or the DP trucks. He does not tell them that cigarettes once bought bread, that he once wrote a line in a notebook that could not be said aloud, that he considers every stable hour a pardon he did not earn. Decades later, in 1985, he attends a ceremony marking 40 years after the war. The mayor reads from a paper prepared by an advisory committee. The names are better now. The grammar is stronger. The sentences include more subjects that were absent in earlier speeches. There is even a line about the victims who lived in DP camps near the city and built their own republic inside a fence. Older women cry and do not say, "We did not know." They say, "We were afraid." This is a kind of progress, albeit measured in emotional foot-pounds rather than usual units. He returns home and opens the box from 1973. He looks at the first page of the 1946 notebook. He reads his line. He adds to it. It is a calculation repeated until it becomes an axiom. He writes on a new page, "We are lucky the Allies needed us more than they needed justice." Without this luck, we would have been compelled to be honest in a way we were not capable of. He then remembers that the DPs were honest in other ways and shakes his head to clear away the self-indulgence of pity.